From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Coming up today from Oklahoma State University, Derrell with the weekly cattle market segment. He'll talk about the counter-seasonal strength in beef demand, contributing to the current rally in cattle prices, plus some other market observations from Derrell you'll want to hear. Also, K-State's Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz will talk about sampling hay meadows and pastures for nutrient needs this fall. He'll tell what to focus on with that soil testing. Later, from the Kansas FFA, J.W. Wells will provide a wrap-up report on the National FFA Convention. And Jeff Wickman has this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Anissa Jepsen about the upcoming Kansas 4-H Science of Agriculture Challenge. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and we appreciate you being along with us for Agriculture Today. As we turn now to a livestock economist from Oklahoma State University for input on the cattle trades, Derrell is joining us from his office in Stillwater. And Derrell, in just a few moments, we want to go over some observations that you've made at several conferences that have taken place with a livestock production orientation to them. We'll get to that in just a second, but continued improvement in the cash fed and feeder cattle markets. This is a very encouraging trend we're into right now.
It really is. We've seen a very impressive run in cash markets and, of course, in the futures as well for both the fed cattle market as well as the feeder cattle, in particular the heavy feeder cattle. Of course, seasonally, the lighter weight calf stocker type cattle generally would be going to a seasonal low about now, and what they've been doing is largely holding steady, which was also a sign of some strength in that market, given the time of year that we're at.
A lot of folks are pointing to, as the underpinning or a part of that support for these markets, the counter-seasonal strength in beef demand. You're watching that closely too, of course. And is that really what's buoying these markets right now?
Well, it's certainly a big chunk of it, I think. And, of course, beef consists of many different products, and they all have different seasonal patterns. But, obviously the middle meats are the biggest part of the value of a beef carcass. And if you look at, rib values, of course, typically do move to a seasonal peak in November. We see the buying there getting ready for the prime rib demand around the holiday season. This year it kicked in a little bit earlier, and that's something that we're kind of seeing a little bit. There's more opportunities now with some of the cold storage technologies out there to allow these end users to book that product a little earlier. So ribs have been higher. On the loin side, it's a mixed bag. Strip loins, which are a very popular summer grilling item, are actually moving lower this time of the year, and they've been doing that. But at the same time, we've seen a dramatic run-up in tenderloin prices in the last month. Again, a little bit ahead of the normal winter steak demand, if you will, and a very impressive move, about 38% increase in those tenderloin wholesale values in the last month. So I think there is some sort of counter-seasonal or at least a little bit early seasonal movement in these markets that's helping pull all of these beef and cattle markets higher.
Is that to say then, because of the earliness of this demand trend, that we will see demand start to wane earlier as well as we get deeper into the holiday season?
Well, yeah, I guess we don't know for sure. I don't know that it necessarily implies that. I think it looks to me like a very, sort of fundamentally strong market. Maybe this is just an indication of the strength of demand, and it's very impressive when you think about the fact that, again, in a longer-term cyclical sense, we're still moving beef production somewhat higher, albeit at a fairly slow pace right now. But we're also faced with, record supplies of pork and poultry. So all of these things taken together tell me that beef demand is pretty good, and I don't know that this necessarily means that we're going to peak early in demand. I think we've just got good, strong demand here to round out the rest of 2019.
Do want to spend a couple of moments here as well on the calf side with an update on wheat pasture calf demand. What are you seeing out there in the countryside?
Well, it's, again, a bit of a mixed bag, at least across Oklahoma. The western part of the state was really pretty dry. Some of the early potential didn't quite pan out, and so it's really has not materialized yet. There's still, I think, a lot of interest in grazing cattle, and we've had some recent moisture, some rain, and some in the form of some wet, heavy snow, which is going to help things. In other parts of the state, we did have some wheat pasture demand, and that has certainly been part of what we've seen in propping up these calf and stocker prices as we move through October, which again normally is the seasonal low. We didn't really move a lot lower across the month of October. The other thing that may be going on is that we still have a relatively large run of calves, and I'm not sure that we've seen them come to town quite as early this year. So we still may have some challenges ahead in November, but I'm hopeful that we will hold these prices more steady than really seeing a seasonal low develop here between now and about Thanksgiving.
Do want to spend some time on an article that you put together recently, and you were basically summarizing your take from 3 conferences you attended in 1 week there in October, and you said there were recurring themes popping up at these conferences. I want to dwell on a few of those and get your impression of what they mean to the markets long term. One of those has to do with labor issues and how they are adversely affecting the agricultural production chain in general and the cattle sector in specific.
That's right. Labor issues is a recurring theme. I think it runs the gamut all the way from basic production. Ranchers have a hard time finding hands to work, cowboys to work on the ranch. Feedlots struggle with labor issues. And then certainly once you get into the meat industry, from packers all the way through further processors and to the retail and food service sectors, there are chronic labor issues across the board. Some of these are tied in with some of the immigration issues that we continue to wrestle with. But the bottom line is, and one of the conferences that I was at really highlighted the fact that the basic demographics in the U.S. with our aging population in the U.S. is that these labor issues are going to continue to be very severe and probably imply that we are going to be looking at trying to resolve some of these immigration-based issues to find the labor pool that we're going to need in agriculture.
And in fact, there is new research out of your home institution, Oklahoma State University, which quantified those issues and how dramatic they could be for the beef cattle sector.
I recently graduated a master's student, and her thesis research involved, among other things, a number of interviews with all sectors of the beef industry, from packers clear through food service and retail. And we were just discussing all kinds of issues related to product trade-offs and really trying to get into beef demand issues, broadly speaking. But one of the themes that came up in those interviews consistently was this labor issue and the challenges of attracting and retaining labor is a chronic issue. Again, across the board from packing plants all the way through wait staff and cooks at restaurants. And so it sort of suggests that the immigration issue becomes one that has to get resolved in some way or another to provide a more consistent and reliable supply of labor for agricultural production and marketing systems.
Well, another frequent subject of discussion you say that you've encountered recently, the expected worldwide shortage of protein for an expanding population. Part of this is driven by the explosion of the African swine fever disease problem, and it's more than just a problem, it's a disaster in countries such as China, and how that could trigger this protein shortage very soon now.
I think we're probably seeing it right now. Again, China's kind of the epicenter just because of its size in terms of population and position in the global market, but also their position as a pork-producing country. Prior to this outbreak, China was producing half of the world's pork. And the estimates are now that, somewhere between 50 and 70 or 80% of the hogs in China may be impacted by this disease. And by impacted, I mean the extremely high mortality rate rates. And so there's probably a protein deficit really stemming from China and surrounding countries that are also impacted by this that cannot be filled in the short run. And so we're going to see less meat in total. Obviously, that has price implications, both direct and indirect, for all protein markets. And it's going to be an impact, I think, for a number of years, because this isn't something, first of all, the disease is in no way controlled right now. There's no vaccine for it. It's a difficult disease to eradicate and to disinfect and repopulate afterwards. And so I think we're probably going to see impacts for a number of years, if not a decade or more, as a result of this.
So when you think about the spillover influence on beef cattle prices ahead, could this serve as something of a floor for prices moving forward?
I think it is. You know, the U.S. impact, especially from a beef perspective, is more indirect at this point. We don't export much beef to China. China is a rapidly growing beef importing country and is by far now the biggest beef importing country in the world, but they're not getting it from the U.S. or, for that matter, from North America. So it's more of an indirect effect, but they are importing pork and beef from other parts of the world. Overall, again, there's going to be this deficit of protein, and that's going to help support these markets. And, of course, at some point, we certainly hope we get past some of the other tariff and trade issues that we have with China and be able to actually actively become involved in trying to participate in that rapidly growing beef market there, particularly in light of this protein deficit that the country is experiencing now.
Well, these are likely to be talking points on the meeting circuit throughout the winter. Before you go, Derrell, quickly looking ahead to the trading week before us, will we see still more improvement this week?
You know, I think we may have a little bit more left in this market. I don't know that it's going to go, tremendously higher from this point. As we get into November, we probably have another couple of weeks here before we really get into that sort of pre-Thanksgiving and holiday period, and from then on we kind of coast out the rest of the year. But I do think there's some potential, given the momentum that's in this market right now, for this thing to go a little bit higher. It's had a good run, so it may be a little hard to maintain that momentum, but I still think there might be a little bit left given these demand issues and demand strength that we're seeing right now.
We appreciate the input. As always, we will catch up with you again very soon. Thanks so much, Derrell.
You're very welcome.
He is livestock economist Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University, on this week's Cattle Market segment, and we'll return shortly with more on this Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and as we continue now, word for you grassland managers and forage managers alike about the value of testing those areas for nutrient needs here in the off-season. It's an idea that should be thought about anyway every few years, our guest tells us. Crop nutrient specialist Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz, K-State Research and Extension. As opposed to our field crop ground, where we would normally test annually, this is something that should be done every once in a while, Dorivar, for good reason, you say.
Yes, in the case of pastures and forage, we typically will suggest soil sampling every 3 or 4 years. And the reason, again, is essentially the same. We want to make sure and we're providing the nutrients that forage and grassland will need to maximize productivity. Of course, we want to maximize forage production. And in many cases, we may have limitation in nutrients. We may have issues with things like soil pH that can limit productivity. And again, it's something that we should be considering doing at least every 3 or 4 years. In terms of the time of the year to do sampling, we really can do it in the fall or in the spring, but typically we'll prefer to do it in the fall, this time of the year, just because it will give us much time to plan our nutrient management. If we need to do anything, any corrective action, then we'll have plenty of time to do that and be ready essentially for next spring.
And we do want to get into the sampling steps in just a second, but are we primarily talking about cool season grasses as far as pasture testing would be concerned, as well as our forages like alfalfa?
Yes, and it really, in those cases, we're talking maybe a few different needs. In most cases, phosphorus could be one of the main limiting factors for both systems. In terms of pH, we did mention pH. Typically, the pasture tend to be a little bit more tolerant to lower pH, so we have a little bit more flexibility there. But when we get to the legumes, and especially alfalfa, like you mentioned, then it's really important to monitor, especially pH, very closely. We're talking about legume that basically fix their own nitrogen, and again, the activity of the nodules of the rhizobia is very sensitive to low pH. So we need to make sure and looking at that pH level very closely. For legumes, again, we really want to have closer to neutral pH range, close to 7 in most cases, to maximize productivity.
Is there ever any reason to test native grasslands for nutrient needs out there?
Yes, it's also something that will have value. Of course, native grasses tend to be a little bit more tolerant, can grow in lower nutrient levels, and in general may actually do better in that kind of scenario. But it's also good to at least every few years do a testing just to make sure everything is in optimum range and we don't have any need to make any changes. But again, because of native grasses tend to be more resilient to lower nutrient levels and so on, we may not need to make any intensive management like we will do for either brome, for example, brome grass, or again alfalfa or any type of forages that again we do manage more intensively.
To the procedure here, collecting a sample, and is it different from what we do with our crop field testing?
There are many similarities actually when we think about crop testing. Typically, recommended sampling will be to collect a 6-inch sampling depth for forage and pasture. And typically, we want to make sure and collect enough subsamples. So we want to use a probe. That would be the best tool in terms of making sure we get a representative sample. And again, if we're thinking, for example, a 10-acre field, typically we want to have at least 12 or 15 cores or subsamples that will basically go into that sample that you will be sending to the lab. And so that's kind of the general guidelines. And again, that will be very similar to the case of crop. One thing that is important, and again, we did mention pH, if we are seeing a pH issue in particular, and if we're thinking about doing lime application, we want to make sure and collect a different sampling depth. And in this case, we really want to have a 3-inch sampling depth. And again, this is very important for forage and pasture because, of course, if we do any lime application, we're not going to incorporate that lime, and we're really focusing on what's happening in that 3-inch layer of soil. So typically, I will suggest starting with a 6-inch sampling depth, evaluate the situation if everything looks good, or if we need to do any phosphorus application, we'll make that decision based on that sampling. But if pH comes back a little bit low and we are ready to do a lime application, then we want to make sure and go back and collect a 3-inch sampling depth just to make sure we are applying the right rate of lime.
And then you want to combine those core samples from the 10-acre area into a composite for submitting to the laboratory.
Yes. And again, that's the key point here is that we're really collecting multiple cores and we're trying to basically come up with a representative sample that will basically give us an average value for that 10-acre or so field that we are collecting. And of course, again, if we do have differences in soil types, or if we are looking at some areas that are clearly different for whatever reason, maybe management or soils, then we want to separate those and treat it differently because more likely the challenges in terms of nutrients and pH will also be different in those areas. So that's something that every producer will have to make a decision. You obviously evaluate your fields. We all are familiar with your specific field. And if you feel like it's going to be something, there's going to be quite a bit of difference between different areas, the best approach is just to split the field and essentially sending 2 different samples to the lab.
If then, Dorivar, upon sampling, one does determine that the pH level is on the low side and they need to lime, when to apply that lime, you have advocated that earlier may be better.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to keep in mind that lime is something that needs some time to react and basically ultimately change the pH and increase the pH. And again, that's one reason why we would like to have that soil testing this time of the year, because it will give us a little bit more time to make that kind of application. But specifically in the case of lime, it may take up to about 6 months for that reaction to happen. And again, we want to, of course, provide enough time for that. And so, again, plan ahead, especially if we're talking about lime. We have to plan and make sure provide enough time for that reaction to happen. You also may want to consider more better quality lime, more fine material that will typically react a little bit faster. In many cases, if we do have good moisture, and one key component here is that we also need to have moisture for that reaction to happen. All of that may happen already in about 3 months. And again, it's really a combination of moisture, quality of the lime material, and that are combined in this situation. So again, especially in the case of lime, and we do need to plan ahead.
And you add that as far as product selection, be sure that you choose something that has a high ECC rating.
Yes, and again, high calcium carbonate equivalent, and of course, again, fine material that will react with the soil immediately.
All right, so it starts with testing, and you can do that here in this month of November for pH levels or other nutrient needs that might exist for your hay and your pasture ground. And while we're talking testing, the row crop season is coming to a close around Kansas, with some fields yet to be finished up, but post-harvest, is that also a good time to set the stage for your nutrient management for next year by testing now as well?
Yes, Eric, I think it's definitely for especially for most of the nutrients that we're going to be evaluating in Kansas, it is a good time. And actually, I would say maybe it's the most popular time of the year for soil testing, harvest all the crops, and again, give us a little bit of a window to get to the field, collect samples, and again, also plan for next year. What kind of fertility maybe require any adjustments, planning ahead for next year. Like I say, for most nutrients, it's an excellent time of the year. We're talking especially things like phosphorus, pH, works very well immediately after harvest. If we are thinking about potassium, though, is something that we have to keep a little bit in mind, and this is not for everybody. It's really in soils, for example, in the southeast part of the state, and some soils in the eastern part of the state where we may have historically low potassium levels. The specific case of potassium, we do have some leaching of potassium happening from the crop residue and back into the soil. So keep that in mind. If you are dealing with a soil that tends to be a little bit low on K, if we're going immediately after harvest, we may not have enough time for that potassium to leach back to the soil and will not be reflected in the soil test analysis. So that would be the only consideration. Like I say, most other soils, especially central and western Kansas, where we do have high K levels, of course, that's not an issue.
Right. If you're interested strictly in phosphorus in particular, a great time to bring in that information and thinking accordingly to next season and how you'll manage your crop fertility program. On the matter of soil testing for hay fields and pasture, there is an article in the recent Agronomy e-Update newsletter dated October the 25th that addresses this at agronomy.ksu.edu. Dorivar, timely thoughts here. We appreciate you coming over, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
That from crop nutrient specialist Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz of K-State Research and Extension. This is Agriculture Today, with still more after the break. That'll include that wrap-up report on Kansas FFA member and chapter achievements from the National FFA Convention, which concluded over the weekend. Also, this week's edition of Tree Tales and the weekly 4-H segment still ahead.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and welcome back to Agriculture Today. Well, we've been sharing reports with you right here in this time slot from the 92nd National FFA Convention, which just wrapped up over the weekend in Indianapolis. And our reporter happens to be in studio with us after the long trek back from Indy. J.W. Wells is the state reporter for the Kansas FFA. And welcome back to you, J.W., to the campus. We want to remind folks of the award winners and those who were striving for awards from Kansas. Those results came forth over the weekend, and we can brag of proficiency award winners.
And Eric, thank you for having me in studio. I'm excited to see the place where all the magic happens. Yeah, Kansas had 2 proficiency winners. We had Cade Riggin from the Riverton FFA chapter in the area of agricultural services placement, as well as Tate Alvers from the Beloit FFA chapter for forage management and products. I'd like to speak very quickly on both of these SAEs.
Please.
Cade Riggin with Ag Services Placement. He helped with harvest on the farm. He helped with working cattle in his area, and his hard work truly paid off, I believe. Tate Alvers, he runs what I'd like to call a traditional SAE. He ran forage. I do not know the full extent of what he grew, but he grew several thousand acres of it. He sold basically bales of hay to clients in Illinois, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, all across the Midwest, Eric. And I would like to take the time to recognize some other proficiency area award winners. Cole Riggin was a finalist for a star. Unfortunately, he did not make it, as well as Tyler Larison, also from the Riverton FFA chapter, and the areas of turf management. And yeah.
Those young individuals, whether they made it to the final pinnacle or not, are extraordinarily accomplished in each of those efforts.
I agree.
So congratulations to each of them, and especially to Cade Riggin and Tate Alvers. Cade from Riverton and Tate from Beloit. They are our National Proficiency Award winners. Hearty congratulations to them. Do want to note as well, Kansas did have an FFA up for national office. He pushed forward but didn't quite make it over the top. But we do want to, again, recognize him for his accomplishments, too.
Yeah. I'd gotten to interact with Garrett pretty frequently over the week throughout the national officer process. One thing I will definitely commend Garrett for is he kept a high energy and he kept a really positive outlook on no matter what happens, I will still be able to serve. National office or not, his methodology and rationale was that no matter what, I will still find a way to give back, regardless if that's national office or not. So even though he didn't make it, that is just not God's plan, Eric.
And our congratulations to him nonetheless. Garrett Craig from the Clay Center FFA chapter for his quest to become national officer. Now, want to ask you, J.W., because you had a chance to spend time on the delegate floor at the National Convention, just your takeaway from the entire event and the experience.
If there was one word I could use to honestly sum up the delegate process and all of the delegates that were involved, I would say the word futurist. Because every delegate that I had the opportunity to interact with, regardless if that was a part of my subcommittee, main committee, or just stroking up a normal conversation, we were all looking to the future of the National FFA organization. What opportunities we can bring to students in urban agriculture. What opportunities we can bring to those students in traditional production agriculture. What opportunities can come about with a new federal charter. In essence, the amazing thing and my key takeaway was that FFA is full of futurists. We are looking to push the envelope on what it truly means to serve and how we can give back.
And it's a great feeling to be part of that, obviously.
Yes, certainly.
And now you're back in school, in class. Tell folks what your plans are, if you would.
Yeah, so back here at K-State, go Cats. Currently, I am studying agricultural economics with a specialty in pre-law. Sometime this week, I am planning on adding a minor of international agriculture. And my end goal with this career is to be working on Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., to either be a lobbyist or be a part of the United States Department of Agriculture.
Well, you're on a great path toward that end and off to a tremendous start. So JW, we thank you for sharing your thoughts not only with us here, but from the convention itself here the past several days. And we wish you all the best, and we will talk again hopefully soon.
Well, thank you for having me on, Eric.
Appreciate you coming over. J.W. Wells is the Kansas FFA state reporter, and that's the wrap-up on the 2019 National FFA Convention. Again, it closed this weekend in Indianapolis. Finishing off this segment, this week's edition of Tree Tales, here's K-State forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Did you know that a properly functioning windbreak may also increase crop yields? Windbreaks and shelter belts were originally promoted across the Great Plains in response to the incredible wind erosion which occurred during the Dust Bowl era of the 1930s. Windbreaks have reduced wind erosion, and a number of studies done some years ago found that the fields protected by a windbreak had higher yields than unprotected fields. Several farmers have told me that a field protected on the north and west side produce better wheat crops, and that fields protected from drying south and west winds produce higher corn and bean yields. I recently completed a study here in Kansas and did find positive effects on yield for wheat and soybeans on many fields. In fact, soybeans growing behind a windbreak showed significant yield increases 46% of the time, with an average yield increase of 16%. Wheat was a bit less responsive, with yield increases 30% of the time, with a 10% increase. These results are based on 163 crop yield seasons. I am now looking to expand the study across the region from Texas all the way to Nebraska and on all crops, and in particular want to get more data from cornfields to assess the effect windbreaks have on yields of this very important crop. If your combine has an automatic yield monitoring system, then you are eligible for this study. If you'd like to participate in this project, please send me an email at cbarden, C-B-A-R-D-E-N, at ksu.edu, or give me a call at my office at 785-532-1444. If your field is a good candidate for the study, I will send you out a flash drive to transfer data on and mail it back to me. If you have a lot of data, we will even come out to work with you to get exported to our system. Again, my email is cbarden at ksu.edu, and the phone number is 785-532-1444 if you would like to learn more about this study. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, forester with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. Now this final break, and then Jeff Wickman brings us this week's Kansas 4-H segment for you.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Teams from across the state will be on the Kansas State University campus this Saturday, competing in the Kansas 4-H Science of Agriculture Challenge. In its second year, the challenge is a hands-on learning experience to inspire the next generation of agriculture leaders. Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen talks about how the challenge is helping youth learn more about science and the role it plays in agriculture.
The Science of Agriculture competition is a really exciting challenge where youth in grades 6 through 12 get to work in teams of 3 of 5 youth to develop a project and then create a presentation to share their results, finding, and or a created product. We really let the youth work with their adult mentor to determine something that is ag-related that affects either their community, the state of Kansas, or nationally or worldwide.
So how are they identifying these projects then?
So this is all project-based or problem-based learning, which a lot of schools are going to with the Kansas redesign model. But students really just take the time to do some research and identify some needs. We do give some guidelines on how you would identify your needs using the pillars of ag literacy. When you look at how agriculture and science work together, you know that ag and the environment, there's ag and animals, there's ag and lifestyle. So all these things, and we do have guidelines that help guide the youth in the determination of their project topics.
We often don't realize how much science goes into agriculture, do we?
Right. And ag is one of the most innovative areas there is out there. If you look back, thinking about how farmers and ranchers have really customized things and tried different methods to make sure that the production levels are increasing. And that's exactly what we're trying to instill in these youth. We want them to really look at some concerns that they're seeing when we think about food production or we think about the environment. Water in Kansas is a huge issue. So we really want them to take some time and really do some research and ask some really purposeful questions on ways that they can help determine some solutions for issues that are going to occur in their lifetime. And it's really fun to see the ideas that the youth have come up with in partnership with their coaches. And then they've also reached out to mentors throughout the state and their community. We have teams that are talking about rations and how best to track how cattle are being fed. We have teams that are discussing how ag education can help focus and grow the next generation of ag innovators. We have teams that are really focusing on pesticides, looking at if we should be going to organic methods or if that's even sustainable. So it's just been really interesting to see the things that they felt that were important to them.
When it comes to the competition itself, how will they determine the top 3 places?
So the really exciting part about this competition is back in September, we had a preliminary showcasing event at the Kansas State Fair. We're really grateful to our partnership with the Kansas State Fair, also with Cargill and Kansas Department of Agriculture that helped sponsor this program. They had a preliminary showcasing event with judges or evaluators at that point that they did their presentations and then they were able to get some feedback. So in November, they'll come back, present their entire presentation, 20 minutes of a team presentation, and then the judges will have time to ask questions, to dig a little deeper for those youth to really expand on some points that maybe were a little unclear in their presentation or to talk through some additional points. And then after that, the judges evaluate and score those teams, and the top 3 are awarded scholarships.
And this is exciting because they're really learning about research and presenting their research through this project.
Yeah, and that's the really fun part of it, because a lot of times when we start to think about research and data, that's not always everyone's like, oh, I'm so excited to compile a bunch of data. But there's a really exciting way that we can talk about data and the things that are important to us. And I think these kids are starting to really understand that we need to know why we're doing something. And the best part about when you start to look at science practices is asking those questions and then collecting the data so that when we do develop new ideas or new thoughts, that we really have thought through the entire process. So that's really exciting to see them excited about the things that they're learning.
And science is a big push right now, not only nationally, but within 4-H itself.
That's right. We're excited to really be moving towards providing professional development opportunities for our agents and volunteers to really understand how science plays an important part in every project area that we do. So when we think about how we're going to talk about science practices in sowing, which is a huge, huge area, when you think about how science works and math and things like that, we just want to make sure that we're asking those purposeful questions, that we're using our guiding questions to help the youth develop their own hypothesis and to understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Now, this involves both 4-H and non-4-H members, so this is something that sometimes has been done through the summer, sometimes as part of their regular curriculum.
Yeah, so the other really exciting thing about the Science of Ag Challenge is in late December, early January, you'll start to see a push asking for teams. So this project is open to all youth in Kansas. You don't have to be a member of 4-H. And the really cool thing about this is a lot of our youth are members of 4-H or have a 4-H experience, so they can help guide those non-4-Hers and show them what 4-H really is about. So the teams are forming in January. They can be done in conjunction with ag education in the school classroom. They can be done outside of the school in our traditional kind of club setting. There's a lot of ways that the adult mentors can work with the youth to develop these project areas.
So you're not only looking for participants, you're looking for mentors and volunteers. volunteers.
Yeah, so that's the really exciting part. We are encouraging the youth to reach out to people within their communities or statewide to really help guide them as they select their project area. We know that the important part about 4-H is that youth-adult partnership. And so we want to make sure that these youth not only have the help of the coach, who is doing the primary guiding of the project area, but they're also talking to those ag industry leaders, that they're reaching out to some of those people that really know what's happening in the industry on a bigger scale. And so we do encourage anyone that's interested in being a coach or learning more about this, not just as a coach, but as a mentor, to reach out to me. And then we're always looking for sponsorships. We're really excited to have Cargill and the Kansas Department of Agriculture be a sponsor this year, but we would love to have more sponsors. And if you want to see what the program's all about, November 9th is the day to come and do that.
And can they find out more on the website?
Yes. So we have information on our Kansas 4-H website under Science of Agriculture.
That's Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen. Again, to learn more about the Kansas 4-H Science of Agriculture Challenge, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.